Our talk today is about cultivating optimism, why it's so important to ethical living. Years ago, I was centrally involved in creating the curriculum for the first summer school for volunteers in the ethical movement, volunteers who were or might take on leadership roles. The summer school itself was an exercise in trust. I had some experience with a similar institution and years as an instructor in adult training and education, and I also had a vision for what the week should be like. The group which created the overall program consisted of 4 professional leaders and 4 lay leaders from the movement. After some opening agreements about the content, I was to write 12 modules of content in 5 months and present that as part of the program. A lot of trust. I took that time to carefully research and interview to be sure that what I had was what was both needed and effective. I didn't print anything out because I kept revising as I went, making sure that all the 12 modules were cohesive and coherent. 2 weeks before I was to take the 10-hour drive to the actual summer school, bringing all the printouts and handouts, and well after we had the participants recruited, a computer virus took down my computer. I mean, completely took it down. It was inoperable. Now, my talk today is about optimism, but I don't want to denigrate the value of pessimism either. I did not have enough pessimism, and I had failed to back up my months of work. But my sense of optimism, that is, the sense that it could work out, carried me through those next 2 weeks. I started by describing my situation to a friend, and her husband loaned me a laptop loaded with the apps I needed to have the materials ready. I began again, working almost non-stop for those last 2 weeks. All my reference books were piled on the floor as I tried to remember what I'd included and what I'd decided not to include. I was finally ready for a trip to the print shop the evening before I was to leave. My husband's car was in the shop, so I was driving my own car. I put the key into the steering column, and it wouldn't turn. No car to get to the print shop. Or the next day to pick up the completed print job, then drive to the location. I admit that I succumbed to panic and hysteria. I sobbed and sobbed. I called another friend, one who had a car of the same make and model, expecting to commiserate. "Oh, that's simple," she said. "Mine does that all the time. It's even in the owner's manual how to deal with it. It's so common." Relax. Get to the print shop, then back home to pack, then drive off with my confidence restored in the morning. I tell that story to be clear. Optimism, the belief that a better outcome is possible, can help us get through bad times, and pessimism can help us make sure we are prepared. Also, optimism is sometimes hard to find. I got an email after the announcement of this week's program. The email read like this: "I see things as they are, not as I wish they were. Trying to live in an unreal world of false hope and false optimism is far more harmful than facing up to the not-so-pretty truth about how things really are. False hope and false optimism destroys the ability of people to change things for the better." Well, I don't disagree at all. In fact, in the description of the program, I said this: the opposite of optimism is a sense of helplessness. It's easy to feel helpless in challenging times. I will reflect on some different meanings and aspects of optimism, including differentiating it from unquestioned faith in a good outcome. One way to look at optimism is to see it as a tendency to expect the best possible outcome no matter what. That is one of the meanings. But I see it more as in the meaning of a tendency to expect that a good outcome can happen. As a personality trait, optimism is the tendency to focus on the hopeful aspects of a situation, on what could turn out well, not to ignore that there are other aspects, but to see clearly that there are elements of hope. Both hope and optimism are words sometimes used to describe the expectation that things will go well, or that things are already wonderful. The philosopher Leibniz defined the philosophical version of optimism as believing that this world is the best of all possible worlds. That statement always reminds me of a quote from novelist James Branch Cabell. The optimist proclaims that we live in the best of all possible worlds. The pessimist fears that this is true. Philosophical optimism has also been defined as a belief that our world is improving overall, and that good, even if it is defeated sometimes, will ultimately triumph over evil. Here again, I have a slightly different take on optimism, and so do most of the psychologists who tell us today that optimism is a healthy attitude to cultivate. Not optimism as uninformed expectation of the best, no matter what, but optimism is a belief that your life or the world can improve over where it is now, and that even if good is sometimes defeated, with our effort, good may prevail. My optimism is a bit more like that of Theodore Parker, a 19th century religious progressive and advocate of social justice. I quoted him earlier. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it tends towards justice. It bends towards justice. That is, it may take a long time for justice to happen, but the universe is friendly towards justice happening. By bends towards justice, Parker clearly, given his other writings, didn't mean it happens automatically. He also wrote that the human mind, with its conscience, naturally loves justice. That was the part of the human being that he appealed to when he made his pleas to abolish enslavement and to expand the rights of women. He was reacting to earlier ideas, including the Calvinistic idea that the universe is unfriendly, humankind is naturally depraved, and the only hope of success was that maybe God would save a few of us. Well, it wasn't just Calvinism, but it was an old world Europe superstition that optimism was dangerous, not just unjustified. The idea was that if you expressed hope or optimism of a good outcome, you were tempting the gods, you were jinxing the good, and you would attract the evil eye. Those ideas continue in common folk traditions that we still pass along. Cautioning someone with visionary plans, don't get your hopes up. Or teaching children, hope for the best but expect the worst. Well, it certainly can be risky to be optimistic. We can feel awful when that optimism doesn't hold up to the reality. Taking a step further, optimism as magical thinking can invite failure, because if we're sure that the best will happen, we won't take the steps that would make that best happen. Even worse, we might have been taught a different kind of magical thinking, though. That trusting that something good can happen will ensure that it doesn't. This is rooted, I believe, in that old unstated idea that the universe bends toward vindictiveness and injustice. You know, in our culture, we get a lot of positive feedback for pessimism. As George Will wrote, the nice part of being a pessimist is that you are constantly either being proven right or pleasantly surprised. When I was preparing for my profession, one step was to have a psychological evaluation. I found it interesting that in that I tested high for both optimism and pessimism. I had not realized before that the two could be separate, not just opposites. If optimism is more appropriately defined as being able to see clearly that a better world is possible, then pessimism is more appropriately defined as being able to see clearly that the world isn't there now, or that things could get even worse. The combination of optimism and pessimism says it will take some work to get from here to a better there. It also says that if we don't act, we'll either get nowhere or to a worse condition. The opposite of optimism, I'd assert, is not really pessimism. The opposite of optimism, practically, is a sense of total helplessness and powerlessness. The idea that nothing I do matters, that nothing I do can change anything, that's the opposite of optimism. Helplessness can lead easily to inaction, giving up, even depression. Situational depression and sadness do have roles to play in our lives. One interesting fact I learned a long time ago: sadness and depression create a chemical state in our brains where we're most able to learn. Not act, but learn. And there are times when it is best to readjust and learn before we act. To see the value of optimism, we can look at how optimism helps us react when we experience poor outcomes, bad situations, or failures. Optimism recognizes poor outcomes are often temporary. A phrase I've loved is falling versus failing. We fall often, and not every fall is a failure. Most of the time, in reality, we can accept that we fell, even if we feel badly about it, and then tend to any wounds and figure out how to recover. Optimism looks at where the situation is and says, I can make the situation better, and I can make it worse, and chooses to try to make it better. Optimism decides to make the best of a bad situation. What is in our power? Where is our leverage to make this better? How do we make lemonade out of lemons? I can't help here but think of the story going around this week about a young autistic boy named Brandon. He became convinced that the "Let's Go Brandon" signs he was seeing were encouraging him personally. And that gave him the courage to try things he was thinking he couldn't do before. Those signs actually gave him optimism, even though that's not actually what they were designed for. But that is a reminder that it is often others around us who foster either optimism or hopelessness. Both optimism and hopelessness can be contagious. Now, I often recommend a particular book to anyone who engages in professional or volunteer leadership. The Leadership Challenge by Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner. When I was working on this topic, I was surprised that I couldn't find mention of optimism in their book as a quality of effective leaders. Well, not by name anyway. One of their key traits they identified in people who are both accepted and effective as leaders is this: they search for opportunities by seeking innovative ways to change, grow, and improve. They search for opportunities. They seek innovative ways. They aim to change, grow, and improve. What better ways to describe what it is to act optimistically? A few years ago, I talked about raising children to be resilient and what it means to be resilient as a person, a family, a group, a community. Resilience is definitely related to optimism, as I'm describing optimism. In Martin Seligman's work on raising optimistic children, he makes it clear that optimism comes from actions, not just trying to create feelings. Children become optimistic by having the opportunity to try new things, to change, grow, and improve, to search for opportunities, and then to learn both the positive reinforcement when there is success and more optimistic ways of handling falls or fails. Instead of just, that didn't work, and so often, I'm not going to try that again. Instead, what can I learn from that not working? Psychologists have studied optimism, and these are some of what they've found. Cultivating a more optimistic attitude can help reduce how many episodes of situational depression one has. Cultivating optimism improves physical health. One is ill less often and recovers faster. No guarantee of perfect health, of course. That would be magical thinking, not optimism. Some studies have been very good at predicting winners of elections by measuring how optimistic the speeches of the candidates are. We tend to follow optimistic people. One study about completing college found that the single most important factor was hope or optimism that one could do this. Having parents who completed college gives one hope. Having supportive teachers and systems can also give hope. And back to resilience. One research study on what they called stress-hardy people showed that 3 attitudes tended to be stronger in these people, all 3 related to optimism. Commitment, curiosity about and involvement in whatever happened to them. Challenge, that is a tendency to take stressful situations as challenges or invitations to figure out how to transcend them, how to grow. And control, willingness to act as though they had influence over their own futures. Now, I would also contend that optimism is a resource for more ethical living. And more ethical living is, after all, what a society like ours is about. For maintaining an ethical life, for becoming our best ethical self, one needs to believe it is possible to change one's own behavior. One needs to believe that one's behavior change has the power to influence others and to influence events outside oneself. One needs to imagine that we and others have a best self, or at least a better self, that we have the power to move towards. Once again, I'll reiterate that pessimism can also be part of the equation. Pessimism can help us see what needs to change and what some of the negative risks of some actions might be. Optimism plus pessimism means we can work to avoid those risks which are dangerous and predictable. Oblivious optimism is not at all recommended. Years ago, I read of a fascinating study on optimism, especially oblivious optimism. The study looked at a large group of parents whose children had been diagnosed with serious cancer. Some of the parents were completely confident that their children would beat the cancer, completely optimistic. God would save them or the doctors would save them. Other parents admitted to themselves and researchers that they knew that their children would most likely die. At this stage of the study, the parents who were completely confident were rated as much more happy. The parents who were skeptical were much less happy. The confident parents had fewer health problems than the skeptical parents did, especially health problems which are made worse by stress. By all measures, the skeptical parents were more stressed. The skeptical parents were more likely to have marriage problems increase, including even divorce. Part 2 of the study. All of the children in the study died. After the children died, the results for the parents essentially reversed. The confident parents were far less healthy, had more marital problems, were far less happy. The skeptical parents were not, of course, really happy after losing a child, but they were able to pick up their lives and go on in a shorter time. Oblivious optimism is fine when everything turns out well, and it's devastating when things do not turn out. Oblivious optimism is not the goal. Now, in that study, I noticed that they didn't differentiate between the skeptical parents who thought, let's try all the possible treatments my child might be able to survive with, and those who thought, my child is going to die, so I'm giving up now. I suspect that that would have been another useful difference to explore, the difference between a realistic optimism and hopelessness. So how do we cultivate optimism in ourselves and others? I'm thinking of a time when I talked to a young mother who had a sense of hopelessness about something she had done with her children. She was actually, as she talked to me, physically bent over, almost shrunken into herself with her regret. Now, what she had done wasn't abuse, just something that hadn't worked out well, and something that she thought violated her own values. I simply said to her, you did the best you could. And then I could see a small transformation come over her. Her whole body said yes. She became more animated. Almost immediately, she named a couple of actions she could do to repair the situation and her relationships. A former colleague, Susan Baggett, used to say as her primary ethical guidance, "We always do our best. We never do our best." It was that phrase that came to my mind as I saw this woman processing both. She could move on to making the best of a bad situation. Psychology tells us that the best parents for children, the ones who raise emotionally healthy children, are not parents who never make a mistake. There are no such parents. The best parental attitude is to repair, rather quickly, those mistakes one has made. Not only does that repair some of the harm that may have been done, but it models for the child a kind of optimism. I can make a mistake, and almost always I have a way to repair it. We can tell this to others. You did the best you could. And we can tell it to ourselves so we don't move into a spiral of hopelessness and helplessness. When we face that we were doing the best we could, even if we were not doing the best we could, we can also face that we can do better next time if we learn more, grow more. That is optimism speaking. Another way to cultivate optimism is to have an experimental attitude. Way back when I worked in a business office, I had a sign on my wall. A professional is someone who does willingly that which they don't yet do well. The optimism in that, if I willingly do this and risk a mistake, I have an opportunity to learn more, and I might succeed more often than I fear I would. Another way to cultivate optimism is simpler, and this may be the most productive method of cultivating optimism. Remember to take time every day to experience joy. Dance as if no one is watching if you like dancing, or sing out some joyful music if you like singing, or watch puppies or kittens playing. Think of that Louis Armstrong song, "What a Wonderful World." Find some moments, at least, every day to renew your own ability to see wonder and possibility and goodness. When we are parenting, or any adult interacting with anyone else, the advice for helping another person cultivate optimism includes these. People need a sense of power rooted in actual accomplishments. Praise accomplishments more than qualities. I love how in that drawing the rose is so realistic, instead of, "What a pretty picture." And don't be overly critical. Like praise, criticize the action, not the person. "I'm unhappy that you hit your sister," rather than "stop being mean." Both praise and criticism of action rather than the person means you're recognizing that how one acts matters, not who you are. And don't solve all their problems for them. A friend who teaches college describes how this year, for 4 different sophomores in her class, a parent came in to question a grade on an assignment. I remember my mother encouraging me to question a grade. But notice I'd said, don't solve all their problems. There are still times for parents to intervene. Probably very few when one is a sophomore in college, though. That also includes not jumping in quickly to tell them a solution to their problems. Optimism comes from experience. So gently guiding them towards a process for solving a problem is much better than giving them a solution. And remember to share moments of joy, just pure joy, jumping up and down together, laughing together, going somewhere fun together, just like practicing joy for yourself. Helping others share joy helps them renew their sense of possibility, their vision of a good life. Well, I thought I'd talk more this week about the practicalities of cultivating this kind of optimism, not in normal times, but in the face of despair or just difficult times. But it's too much for one talk. In 2 weeks, I'll be talking again on Sunday, and that week I'll talk about choosing between hope, that is a kind of optimism, and despair. To become a better person, to make a better world, requires a belief that we can be better, that the world can be better, that the universe can bend towards justice. To become a better person, to make a better world, also requires the belief that our actions have the power to make real change, that we have some impact on when and how much that arc of the moral universe will bend. For those watching later on video, I invite you to join us some Sunday live on Zoom or in person. Check out our programs at rysec.org.